us a little bit about what you saw and being able to relay that message to Cora when you watched Kimbrel pitch and kind of help out so he wasn't tipping his pitches.
So tipping pitches, we hear about it all the time.
People at home understand what tipping pitches is all about.
It's amazing.
And that's remarkable.
Alex, the time has come. The 4th annual State of Labor in Baseball with Michael Baumann. This has really become a bellwether episode for us over the years. The first one we did, as we were just talking about before we started recording, I don't even think we called that one State of Labor in Baseball. We probably just made a pun title for it, but then
pretty sure it was a labor of love, which tracks.
Sounds like what I would try to name this episode if it was not the next in a series. Baumann has been so generous with his time with us over the years and coming on and shooting the shit about labor, talking about serious issues, doing consumer rants, and this is always one of I think our statement episodes for the year. A nice way to set the tone to recap what we have been talking about for the last year, but also kind of foreshadow and set the tone for what we intend to talk about or intend to focus on for the next year. So if you've never listened to one of the States of Labor in Baseball, I know I'm starting this episode out so seriously. I'm not cracking any jokes.
I know, but no, there's no question you want to ask me.
No, I don't have any questions for you other than, can you believe that we were at karaoke last night and someone was doing Skinny Love in front of the entire bar?
That was a cultural reset, honestly.
Can you think of a worse song to do in front of an entire bar at a karaoke bar? Not because it's not a good song, or not because it's not maybe fun for you to sing along to, but for the rest of the bar, it just sets an incredibly weird vibe.
Because you're like, all of a sudden you're at a concert now. Now I'm just like, I just want to sip my drink and listen.
My other question was going to be, can you believe that we were censored by that karaoke bar when they broke the microphone before giving it to us to sing Vindicated in front of the entire bar?
That was so rude, but you know what I'll say? We didn't need the mic.
We didn't need the mic.
No.
Because all the dudes, all the dashboard confessionalists were in there and we opened up the pit. Anyway, back to the point of the podcast. States of Labor in Baseball, this is the 4th one. The other 3, I think, are fun time capsules. If you are a new listener and you haven't listened to any of them, they're definitely of a moment with some of the things that we were focusing on, but I think if you have extra time or you're looking for something to go back and check out, I think they're worth it contextually to hear what we've talked about over the years. It's usually our first or second episode of the new year. So if you scroll back in your feeds a year back or 2 years back or 3 years back, you'll see those episodes. This one, we really got into it. It was a little more adversarial than our past States of Labor in Baseball. This is just because I haven't seen Mike in a while. I don't work with him anymore, so I can't poke and prod him. So this is my one opportunity to do that. But he kept being like, "You're such a fear mongerer."
Yeah.
I don't know, man. Everybody seems so optimistic. And I feel like we shouldn't be optimistic.
Well, you got him there by the end. By the end, I think we were all filled with the pessimism that this sport rightly bestows on us.
What's the state of Alex? How you doing? It's been a while since we've recorded anything in person together.
It is a little weird. I have Stevie next to me right now.
It's been right in the world again.
It's been strange the last few weeks, but I'm good. Apologies if my voice is is struggling.
Yeah, a
little bit. The pipes were moving last night. We were at a musical bar. Like a show tunes bar.
Yeah.
I didn't know any of them, but everyone else was having fun.
We were at a karaoke bar that Matt Harvey's picture and signature was on the wall for, which is wild.
I wasn't prepared for that, really.
West Village legend, Matt Harvey. What else is there to say? All up and down the West
Side. His pictures on One Oaks wall. Like, do they have a celeb wall?
No, because I feel like that so many the clientele is mostly celebrities there.
Right. So it's not
That'd be weird to have a celeb. They should have like a normies wall.
Right. Like you and I can be on there.
Exactly. Thank you to our new patron this week, Pete. I always love when there's one new patron in a week because then I get to just shout out that person individually. It makes it more special for Pete. Thank you to Pete. He picked the 1 week where no one else signed up. That's just good timing.
That is good timing on your part. So Pete, this episode's for you.
The whole episode is dedicated to Pete. Thank you, Pete. Other Patreon housekeeping before we get to our conversation with Mike. The holiday cards, as promised, for the top tier Alex Rodriguez VIP Club. They're verging on maybe not being holiday cards anymore, but they are cards, and they do exist. They have arrived at Alex's apartment, and they will be signed, sealed, and delivered in due time. You know,
Right. Yeah, we're not going to put a date on it,
right?
necessarily.
The holiday could be May Day, and
Right,
you know what? That would be
exactly.
more honest to who we are. The holiday could be pitchers and catchers reporting. That might even be optimistic. The holiday could be opening day.
Yeah.
Well, we don't know, but you're going to get the card.
Yeah, we're non-denominational here, right? We don't subscribe to one holiday or the other.
Right. My denomination is seeing Max Scherzer back throwing bullpens
That's right. That's right, brother.
in shorts.
All is right in the world.
Okay, let's do it. State of Labor in Baseball, Part 4, 2023. We're going to do it. But before we do, I am Bobby Wagner,
I am Alex Baisley.
and you are listening to Tipping Pitches. State of Labor in Baseball, Part 4. We are joined by the one and only Michael Baumann, whom I have not talked to on or offline in quite a while. So perhaps we have a lot to catch up unrelated to labor in baseball. But Michael, hello. Welcome
Hi.
back to the show.
It's always fun to do this. I feel a little pigeonholed only being the labor and baseball guy. I would have thought that I warranted more frequent appearances, but apparently not. Nevertheless, I'm happy to fulfill this role that you guys have carved out for me.
Listen, you have one of those cards that you can play to come on, like a get out of jail free card, a get on Tipping Pitches card.
Okay.
Whenever you'd like to. So if there's something else that you want to talk about, whether it be Wade Miley or Drew Smiley or Jordan Lyles or whatever other minutia you're writing about day to day on FanGraphs.com, new role since the last time you've been on the podcast.
We were just talking about this. The amount of baseball stuff I have to develop an opinion about is just it's a quantum leap from even the early days of the Ringer where I was writing more frequently about baseball. I wrote about Eric Hosmer's like park effects that's going to be going up tomorrow. Like, man, I know so much. My brain is so big right now.
Well, so if anything, this is a break for you. This is your bread and butter right here.
It's
you can
true.
you can
Yeah.
turn the brain off. We'll talk labor. Easy money.
Yeah, definitely. That's what I want people to think about my brain or my labor analysis. Is this is a guy who's turned his brain off.
Exactly.
I think people have been thinking about that, thinking
Yeah, I
that about
walked
you
right
for
into
years.
that.
Yeah, exactly. I got ahead of myself. Couldn't even get the joke out. Michael, you're here to talk about the state of labor in baseball and maybe do your third straight consumer rant at the end of the podcast, but we'll save that for when it gets here. I guess we should just start from a macro perspective. A lot has happened in the last year. We got a CBA since the last time we talked. The minor leagues have unionized since the last time we talked, which I never thought I would say out loud. So I guess from your general health, grade the state of labor in baseball, A through F, from a general overall health perspective. And then we can dive into some of the details of it a little later.
Okay, so a letter grade. I was going to say, so when they do the State of the Union, like the president has to say the State of the Union is either good or bad, but
let's do that. That's great. That's
The
better
state
than
of-
letter grades.
We were
Letter
going like
grades are
health
sham.
department.
Right,
yeah, I was like, I'm not prepared to talk about my health on this podcast. But for the first time since I've been coming on and doing these appearances, the state of labor in baseball is good.
Wow.
I'd say like at
Big
least a
words.
solid B to B plus. Yeah, I am optimistic about the way things are going right now.
So, I mean, when we look back on everything that has happened in the last year, right? And Bobby just rattled off a few of them, and it all comes amid sort of this, I hesitate to say historic amount of spending, because inflation and all that sort of stuff. But we're seeing a lot of money being handed out to big free agents this offseason. And I wonder, kind of looking at all these sort of data points, do you see them as indicative of a changing of the tides when it comes to labor in baseball? Or is it more kind of a respite from how things have have been, right? Is it more just kind of noise that things, might go back to normal in a couple of years?
Well, I think that so there are a couple trends that that are notable in terms of free agent spending. One is that teams are actually buying good players and attempting to win, which is something that I took for granted my entire life until about 2016, 2017 or so. That teams are actually going after top of the market free agents and giving them, huge guarantees. We're seeing some movement at the top of the market in terms of average annual value. One thing that we're not seeing is, I guess with the exception of Aaron Judge and some of these very short term contracts for older pitchers, is a huge rise, is a separation between what the absolute top of market guys get and what the second tier guys get, which is not the end of the world for me. The people that I'm least concerned about in terms of labor or consumers or stakeholders in baseball are like Rafael Devers or Trea Turner. Like those guys are going to get what's coming to them. That sounded ominous, not in a bad way. They're going to get what they deserve. And they're going to become oppressor class rich, no matter what. Whether it's they make $300 million or $500 million.
You can't be doing blanket threats to Trea Turner like that now that he lives so close to you.
I don't know where he's going to live.
Well, he's going to spend at least 81 days very close to you next year. So
he's a little man. I'm not afraid of him. If the Phillies had signed Carlos Rodon, that would be a different story. But Trea Turner's a teeny little man. I don't fear him. But there's a flattening, which means that it's worth it to go out and spend big money on. Like it's worth it to spend $27 million a year on Trea Turner. We'll see about Carlos Correa, or like Xander Bogaerts, versus spend like $25 million a year on Dansby Swanson. And I think that's doing a lot to the rhetoric around these huge contracts, these huge star level contracts, because people were saying about Bryce Harper, can you believe that he's going to be under contract until, for 13 years? I'm like, yeah, well, look at the AAV. Like this is not that much to spend on a player that good now. And it will be even less so if we're all still alive in 2030. But what we're seeing is the upper middle class of free agents, the Taiwan Walker, Jameson Taillon, guys like that are being made whole. And that was a real concern in the real doldrums of the capital strike in the late 2010s, was just this entire class of players that were, had their service time manipulated, that were getting underpaid at the minor league level. They're like, if you make it to free agency, you will get yours. And then the owners are just like, nah, you're not gonna. And now, we're seeing those guys start to get paid again, which is nice. As much as I would love a fundamental upheaval of the system, free agency, I think, is doing about what it's supposed to, which it hasn't been the case for at least 5 years.
Yeah, you mentioned the long contracts, and I think that they are one of the trickier aspects of the trends of spending that we've seen, and like the positive vibes around labor in baseball of the last couple months, really since minor league unionization. I feel like people generally, and even us on this podcast, generally feel like things are going better in the last few years because we're not stupid. We're looking around and saying things are definitely actually better than they were the last couple of years. A lot of people have attributed that to a new CBA, owners feeling like they have a level of financial security with what they know to be the contract, and so that they are not trying to hedge their bets a little bit to see what happens in a eventual lockout or an eventual strike or whatever might come from that. So, but for me, I can't totally get behind these long contracts being great for the game until I'm like 5 or 6 years into them and I see how that affects the future structure of deals. Does that make sense? Or am I like panicking over it a little bit too much? Like, yes, it's good that these players are getting these huge sums, and it's obviously their choice that they're taking longer security over short-term, higher average annual value. But I do think that the way that the baseball economic system is structured, it leads to less trickle down for guys that are going to be negotiating these contracts in the future, while allowing the sort of absurdly large revenues of baseball continuing to grow. More of that pie is going to be going to the owners, if that makes sense.
I don't think so. I agree with you that we won't know the total, the totality of the effect for maybe 5 years, maybe even longer than that for some of these 10, 11-year contracts. But I think that the pie is not constrained by those contracts. It's constrained by the existence of a luxury tax. And as long as most owners are going to abide by that, if the absolute top end superstar players are still getting theirs, they're still getting their $300 million contracts. If it's $300 million over 7 for a 30-year-old or a 31-year-old, somebody like Xander Bogaerts, versus, I guess Bogaerts didn't. I'm rounding. Bogaerts didn't literally sign for $300 million, but for 7 years versus 11, I don't think that's depressing his total career earnings all that much. And if you're looking at a tax number and those tax numbers are fixed, and I don't think that's good. I just think that is. And that's just something we're going to have to deal with for the foreseeable future, that he's taking up a smaller percentage of that total tax number. And a lot of teams are still using that as a threshold, or, or even if they're going over, they're trying to stay tethered to it to at least a certain point, except for the Mets. And so if Bogaerts is taking up, I don't know, 27 million of that as opposed to 35 or 37, then that is getting redistributed to middle relievers, or to Gene Segura or Craig Kimbrell or Drew Smiley, guys who are getting like real money. Drew Smiley signed for, what was it, 2 and 19, guaranteed with an opt out. That's big for somebody who's really a fifth starter, even with the amount of money that's being tossed around now. And so teams are going out and committing money deeper on the roster. And I think that's it's an undeniable good, because like I said, the guys that I'm worried about is not Bryce Harper or Xander Bogaerts or Aaron Judge's fourth $100 million that they make over their career. It's whether it's guys like Rich Hill or Drew Smiley or Jordan Lyles, or Kyle Gibson, guys who are making a career out of this. Like, they should get rich based on and like sustainably rich based on the amount of money that's getting poured into the sport. Because if it's not going to them, it's certainly not coming back to us.
I thought the way that you put it earlier, when talking about the state of things right now, was interesting. How it's not like this moment is an aberration where owners are deciding to spend. This was actually the norm for much of the history of baseball, was that you expected the teams to go out and spend money on the good available players. And it's really that the last decade or so, even less than that, has been the kind of aberration, so to speak. So what do you think the sort of impetus was for that change, for teams to come back to the table and say, actually, we do think it's prudent to sign the good players out there? Like, does it take one owner coming in and saying, I'm going to buy up all the good players that I need to in order to win? Is it them making a collective calculation that actually cutting our losses is not getting us very far?
They don't make collective calculations. That's been in the news.
Right.
It's been,
yes. No, that's been debunked many times.
So I think a lot of it has to do with the cooling of tensions after the lockout. That the detente that we have, it's not just that we've got a durable system that's going to be in place for the next few years. I think just the amount of bad blood that went through the capital strike years and then the pandemic and the negotiations around that. And then even though the lockout didn't really have a big tangible effect, I think, on the structure of baseball, it's just going through it took so much of the animus out. And it also helps that there are owners that no matter what, Tampa Bay is never going to spend no matter what. Cleveland's never going to spend no matter what. Pittsburgh's never going to spend no matter what. And some of those teams find ways to be competitive in spite of that, for sure. But it requires owners who actually want to win. And if that's the Mets, for a change, the Wilpons never ran rock bottom payrolls, but they certainly weren't doing what Steve Cohen was doing. The Rangers are spending when they historically have vacillated between spending and not. The same, the Padres are spending in a way that I don't think they ever really have. The Phillies are acting like a big market team. You need the Blue Jays. The list goes on. And for whatever reason, I don't know whether this is the result of collective discussions, or just a bunch of individual teams have decided to invest all at the same time. Like that's what we need. That's what this system needs to work, is just competition. That's what it's supposed to be. And I'm not going to stand up here and cape for a system that privileges owners and depresses wages with a draft and a salary cap and arbitration. But there is a logic to it under capitalism, the way it's supposed to work. And I think the difference between where we were 5 years ago and now is it's working the way it was designed to work.
Yeah, I think you're right. I guess I hate to be like the cynic that's sort of pouring cold water on the whole like discussion in the state of labor being good compared to the last 3 years of us doing this. I guess I'm just a little bit skeptically looking at this as, okay, what has really happened in the last year? We had a lockout and we had owners basically double down on the system that we all agreed 1 year ago is totally broken. And now this is just like we sprayed some Febreze on this totally rotten system for a few years, but then 6 years from now, aren't we just going to look back with the same negativity that we've been looking on it for the last 6 years? Like, I struggle to see what from the last year, other than minor league unionization, which we should probably pivot to shortly as one of the shining beacons of last year. I struggle to see what has fundamentally become healthier in the long term. Like what I look at is I see owners who have recognized that they pushed it a little too far, and that especially with regards to the pandemic, they really lost a lot of the court of public opinion in comparison to when they've previously acted out throughout baseball history. And I don't know, like, am I happy for all of these guys getting paid? Yes. Do I think that all of these guys getting paid necessarily means that the sport is in a healthier place, 10, 20 years from now? Probably not. I think it's just a continued renewal of the same system that we all agree is going to suppress younger players' salaries and then give the option to owners with what they do with older players in free agency in the future. And I don't think that just because they're doing it now means that they will do it in the future.
I agree 100%. And what you're making it like the difference between the way I'm articulating this versus you, I don't think that's a disagreement over the facts. I think, I'm acknowledging that we've sprayed Febreze on the rotten fruit, and the Febreze rotten fruit smells way better than the non-Febreze rotten fruit. So,
right. There's a reason Febreze sells.
But absolutely 100%, like this system working, and I'm making, asshole quotes with my fingers here, is dependent on the commitment of a small cabal of billionaires to do something other than just line their pockets, which I admit is probably not the most durable, sustainable system that you could have. So what's stopping this from backsliding as the next CBA negotiation approaches? I think the only real structural change is we'll see what happens with the minor league CBA negotiation. Like that is the only major structural difference. I think that, there are small structural changes that, the pre-arb bonus pool, for instance, like that's putting a significant amount of money in the pockets of players who really deserve it. There are small things worth celebrating, but I think the difference between you and I think don't disagree on the facts or the norms. I think just I'm taking an incrementalist view and you're taking an accelerationist view. And
wow,
I'm celebrating
it's
reform
flipped from what it usually is between us.
Is it? I feel like I've maybe things were just so bad the past couple of years that I would just like screw it, burn it all down. But
no, I was talking about the wider world, not baseball wise. Like you're usually
you think I'm more of an accelerationist than you?
I don't know. We'd have to really sit down and talk about all the issues.
I feel like, I don't know. That's a conversation we should have off air, but that surprises me because I do feel like an incrementalist a lot of the time in
right. You can tell
spaces.
this one really got to you, Mike. This it's quite an accusation being thrown.
I don't think it's an accusation. Like I think like the cool thing to be is an accelerationist. I think it's deeply uncool to be incrementalist, but I'm acknowledging that I usually am the uncool thing when there are real world stakes involved. But I guess like I don't know, you don't want to like go break out the bargaining team minutes from
no, I'd rather not.
From February 2021, but
they're buried in a Google Doc for a reason.
Yeah.
But okay, so speaking of bargaining, we have to talk about it, and it's been
Segue
referenced a few
alert.
times already. Yeah, that's right.
Alert. Yeah.
The minor leagues, they unionized, or at least they said they were gonna unionize. They've been recognized.
They got recognized.
They got
done.
recognized. So it's there. The work now is obviously creating that bargaining agreement, which is a massive uphill lift, as I'm sure both of you guys know. Creating your first bargaining agreement is certainly not something to be taken lightly, and it's something that takes time. So I'm curious. That was back in September. We're now 4 months out from that, or so. We haven't really heard a lot in terms of movement since then, as I'm sure they kind of both sides kind of get ready to get their ducks in a row. But I'm wondering what you think this process sort of looks like, and what is the, I guess, 50th percentile outcome for minor leaguers, like the reasonable sort of things for them to achieve, or what the sort of pie in the sky, I guess, CBA looks like for them.
Oh, I don't even want to go pie in the sky. So I'll say, like, this is getting the first. So if you're a white collar worker, which, like, basically baseball players are, I would classify them. They're not mining coal or anything. The hardest thing your union is gonna do, particularly if your bosses are used to having everything, is getting a first collective bargaining agreement. Just getting the bosses to back down from we have everything to we have most of it is just such a huge lift, and it takes so much commitment and resolve. And it's, having been through it myself, like it's one of the hardest things that I've ever had to do.
It's honestly more of a conceptual hurdle than an actual
because once you have that
quantifiable hurdle.
Because once you have that first bargaining CBA in place, you're bargaining over money. And money is numbers, and if there are numbers, then you can average them, and there's a compromise somewhere in the middle. If you're bargaining over values, if you're bargaining over like a philosophical disagreement over we deserve part of this, I mean, we really deserve all of this, but like for the acknowledging the world that we live in, we deserve part of the labor that, labor is entitled to some of what it creates. Like, it's basically what you're going into the table
famous
with.
Quote.
Yeah. Like getting that through the heads of people who are used to passive income is very, very difficult. And so like that, I don't know, I really don't know how this is going to end up, just because the range of outcomes is so great. And I think the minor leaguers really have the bully pulpit in the way that no other sports union, I guess, like the PHWPA, the women's hockey union, is the only one that has really had the like public consensus on their side the way the minor leaguers would. And that's it's a much smaller megaphone that those women were operating with, even though, like, I think it's, I don't know, I don't want to go back into that. It's the best executed sports labor action of my lifetime. What the what is now the PHWPA did a few years ago before the World Championships. But anyway, like the public is like, these guys need to get paid, and they need to have better working conditions. So like, what's a realistic outcome that they should be shooting for? I think it's what minor league hockey players get who are unionized, which is every one of them makes a living wage. It's not, you're not going to get rich, but like, if you're a full-time minor league hockey player in the AHL or ECHL, you're making at least, I think it's about $50,000 a year, and you're getting health insurance. And if you get traded or reassigned during the season, the team will help with moving costs and relocation. And like, I think that's what everybody deserves.
Yeah, right. I was going to say, that seems, dare I say, normal?
Well, it's so much more than what they have now.
I know.
Living in closets, making $8,000 a year that they're used to living with. You just think about, I think there's a romantic, paying your dues type of conception of the minor league baseball player. It's like, a 21-year-old who's just out of college and is chasing his dream. And, we all, like, you were in a band and you did a tour across the East Coast or something. You all piled into the van and, slept, couch surfed and stuff. And, or,
drop the Bandcamp link, Mike.
Yeah, what did Jerry DePoto do.com. So I do have a Bandcamp. That's the only song on it. So it, but everybody has this romantic, like almost famous type of conception of like, these are just young guys chasing their dream with nothing to lose. And so many of them have wives and kids. So many of them have like families to support. Or, imagine like, you're out of college or you're out of high school and you're in your first job and you're trying to like put down roots, maybe start a family, maybe save money to buy a house, and you're making a couple $100s a week and, living at a best case scenario in a hotel, and you have to pick up and move every 4 months. Like, that's no way to live. And, there are necessary sacrifices that I think you need to make. Like, this is not a normal job. This is not like working at TD Bank. This is different from
no free ads.
Yeah, certainly not for banks. That's my bad. I should know better. You're not working a normal white collar job. This is different.
Yeah.
It's going to be harder in a lot of respects, but it's just the nature of the way things have to work. And everybody, all the players will acknowledge that, but it shouldn't be this hard. It should be attainable. Like, you should be able to live comfortably if you're a professional baseball player in the United States. I would argue in the Dominican Republic or Venezuela, but that's like the next frontier for labor. But you should be able to live like a comfortable middle class existence if you're doing this. There's that, there's enough money to make this happen within the sport without anybody breaking a sweat. And it's the way it is in hockey. It's the way it is in basketball now too. With the G League, and there's no reason this can't be the case in baseball. And I think that's a fair question to ask. It's a question that the union should be raising in public as they do these negotiations. Like, if this is possible in hockey, why isn't this possible in baseball? If this is possible in basketball, why isn't this possible in baseball? Why are our guys unpaid or like seasonal apprentices or whatever the verbiage was? You should be able to, even if you're not getting rich, you should be able to not worry about where you're going to live or what you're going to eat. Yeah. It's just such a basic tenet of human dignity generally that I don't think that baseball players it's going to be a very easy argument to win in a way that like Max Scherzer and his $40 million contract being the front man for the major league players when they were negotiating their last CBA, it's a hard circle to square for a lot of people, and it just isn't the case. And I think like one of the biggest battles that minor leaguers have won even before they unionized is that you go to like the average person, the average even baseball fan, you say, you talk about guys in AAA, they're like, oh, they're getting paid millions to play a kids game. Like, no, they're not. They're not getting, a lot of them aren't even getting paid tens of thousands to get to play a kids game. And just now that that's common knowledge, that's such a big hurdle to minor leaguers getting the livelihood that they deserve taken out of the way. So I think that's a realistic thing to aim for. I think that's something they can and should get.
Yeah. So to me, there are sort of three buckets of interest in bargaining, but in the whole process. The first one is, you've already kind of alluded to it. It's making a living wage in the present, making it possible to be a minor leaguer day in, day out, year in, year out, to try to have a career in Major League Baseball. That isn't the case now, but that is something that bargaining definitely will address, and I have no worries that is something that will be vastly improved by bargaining. The second thing is what happens to minor leaguers after they wash out. I think that needs to be part of the first CBA too. There needs to be some sort of team sponsored or programmatic approach to what happens when these guys have to transition out of the extremely weird world of baseball that the owners have created by design to line their pockets with these minor leaguers who, provide a tremendous value in total, but maybe not as much value individually as Major League Baseball players. So I don't know what that looks like, whether that's like a career program, whether that's a going back to school and getting it entirely paid for program, no matter what your contract says, no matter what your previously agreed to terms with your Major League team say. And then the third part of it is more conceptual for me. Like, the third part of it for me is, how much do the minor leaguers really want to test the waters of what their value actually is to Major League Baseball? And what kinds of things can they say, hey, we deserve this? What do we deserve, revenue sharing in terms of what the teams are making? Do we deserve a certain percentage of what the pie of Major League Baseball is, or do we just deserve these flat numbers? And how are we going to approach that negotiation? Because this is their one chance to get all of that stuff, like you said. The first CBA, the philosophical differences that you approach and introduce and bargain over and are able to win are going to set the
determine the ground rules for
forever, for literally forever. The first CBA, Marvin Miller is the reason that we have the different structures that are pro Players Association now. Like, this is just the way things work. Now, are there ways to make radical changes in different labor sectors in the United States? Yes, there are ways, but this is not a particularly friendly environment to that type of union activity.
And even if you do that, you still have to overcome the status quo that you negotiated the first time.
Exactly, because then they're what lawyers are always going to say is, this is the way things have always been done.
Yes.
And that is an incredibly pro-management, pro-capital way of thinking, but that is just the world that we live in right now, and particularly the country that we live in right now, especially when it comes to athletes, that after they are making a living wage, like, the public really isn't going to care all too much about the specifics, the minutia of the structures. Like, nobody besides us really cares about the revenue sharing and luxury tax numbers. Really, nobody but a select few amount of people really care about those specific details. And so that third bucket is kind of the one that I'm most interested in seeing how it plays out. I'm also kind of curious, like, how much we're even going to know about that stuff, because I don't think now that everybody has sort of patted themselves on the back that we've all supported minor leaguers enough and they have a union, like, I'm really curious to see what the rest of media that finally came around to this problem really cares enough about to cover over the next couple of years as they do negotiate.
Yeah. And I think that's a fair, reminder that, like, I need to report on this more than I've been doing, frankly. But so bucket 2, I think the transition out, that is also, I think, attainable, because
me too.
What you mentioned, like, if a team signs, even a college junior or a high schooler out of a college commitment, like, I don't think it's universal, but I think it's very common that they say, if you don't have your degree and you sign with us now, we'll help you go get it once you're done playing, if that's something you want to do. And I think, like, throwing in for job training or, internships or something, like, baseball teams have so many business connections, and
exactly, yeah.
And, like, ex-athletes are, they have a leg up on those of us who couldn't run very fast in the job market. Like,
you don't know how fast Alex is. He could be a 4.6 guy right in front of your very own eyes.
That's true. I'm not very fast, and it hobbled me in the job market. It would cost the owners almost nothing to, like, set up some sort of internship pipeline or something, and it would be such a huge PR win. I think that would be an easy get. That would be something that both sides could come away with, like, seeing as a win. As far as bucket 3, testing the limits, I think that curiosity of yours is going to go completely unsatiated, because, like, these guys have a lot to lose, and they don't have millions of dollars or even hundreds of thousands of dollars of reserves to sit on if they go on strike and, like, they try to wait out a year. And these guys are hungry.
But,
like, what they want to do.
Do they not now, though, that they're part of the Players Association? Like, is there not a certain amount of money from the strike fund of the MLBPA now that they have a new CBA that they could allot to minor leaguers to at least maintain the terrible status quo that they already have?
That's true. And so, but that's going to be limited. But, the players aren't, the big leaguers aren't going to set aside, like, enough to keep the entire minor league ecosystem, fed and housed for 2 years.
Then they shouldn't have allowed them into the union then, if they weren't actually going to stand up for them when the fight comes,
I've got bad news about veteran athletes and what they do to the young guys when push comes to shove. These are athletes who know that they have a limited window in which to capitalize on the very prestigious, lucrative dream that they've been sold their entire lives, that they've been working their entire lives for. They're not going to, like, it's hard enough to get big leaguers to down tools for enough time to make ownership sweat. Like, if you want it, like, we will absolutely find out how much the minor leaguers are worth if they decide to go on strike for an extended period of time.
Yeah, and the answer is a larger number than the owners want people to know about.
It's a larger number than they're going to get, because I don't think that you're going to get these competitive guys who are all, self-interested. They're all trying to make the majors themselves to stunt their own development by going on strike and getting rid of a big chunk of the season. And there's a limit to, as much as, we could talk about a strike fund, or we could talk about, an MLBPA sponsored camp to keep these guys in shape, and, hiring coaches and getting them, continuing their development if a work stoppage does come. And I hope I'm wrong on this, but that's a big lift for guys at that point in their careers. And so I'm skeptical that we're going to get this kind of burn it all down moment that you're hoping for, even though I think you're right. I think if they did that, they could end up much better off than even, pro labor lefties like us think that they can do. I just don't know. Like I said, I'd love to be wrong, but I just don't see that as a realistic outcome. If we do see a work stoppage, it'll probably be pretty limited. And this is what we saw in the, it's going to be something I think about with regards to this lockout at the major league level, like for the rest of my career, is like the executive committee voted unanimously not to accept the CBA.
Yep.
And the rank and file wanted to play. And, I don't know how much difference that would have made, because by that point they had negotiated themselves into maintaining the status quo, which is not to say, I think they got a bad deal. I think they got the best deal they could at the time. And they, won a lot of meaningful, stuff and got the game going back on the track that, it was designed to operate on. But it seems like, union leadership did not think this was a deal worth accepting, and the players and the rank and file just wanted to get back and play. And I just don't know how you're gonna ever get around that in the context of a sports labor union.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, definitely with much less guaranteed, you're risking far more. And you talk about the mindset that has kind of created this environment, right? That, the minor leagues are a grind and you got to pay your dues. Like, as much as the conversation kind of has shifted on a grand scheme of things, those clubhouses are still very insular, right? And this is still something that's like instilled in them from a very young age, right? Is pay your dues, go out there and grind and, work out 25 hours a day and all that. You hear that from major league players all the time, right? And so as much as they might be talking about the value of their labor, as it were, and it's probably not even in terms like that, I think you're right that there's probably still a pretty strong mindset of like, at the end of the day, I'm here to play baseball, and I just want to kind of do that in a way that ruffles feathers like as little as possible.
And what you mentioned about the insularity of a clubhouse, you can use to your advantage in a sports labor context. Like, it makes it very easy to organize. Yeah. I think that's a big part of the reason why we went from zero to recognition in the span of, I don't even remember, like it was just like a few days.
Like a week.
Yeah, from when news of this broke publicly to the league recognizing the union. And like that's one advantage of the insular clubhouse. Whereas at the major league level, you are working together as a team within your clubhouse, and you're trying to compete on the field and look out for each other on the field. And that kind of, that team atmosphere, it translates very well to a union shop context. Whereas in the minor leagues, you're doing this job so in order to not have to do this job anymore, like, you want out of this clubhouse, which means there's a lot more turnover, which makes it harder to build that team solidarity. But also, you're competing not just against your opponents, but really more than you're competing against your teammates for playing time at the next level, more than you're even competing against your opponents to win on a night-to-night basis. And so I don't know that any minor leaguer would articulate things that way, but I think it has to change the calculus on a subconscious level.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, if only because people are in places for shorter amounts of time, and it takes time. It takes a lot of time to bring people around to radical ideas, honestly. And even when they're not that radical, it takes a lot of time to bring people around to the idea of deciding to form this union. That's why we were so gobsmacked when all of this was happening so fast. Now, of course, stuff was happening behind closed doors for much longer than we knew about. And they did such a great job of organizing it. Even though it was happening out in the open, I think that we could only kind of read between the lines of this stuff leading towards unionization with something like Advocates for Minor Leaguers and the collective actions that they were sort of taking to raise awareness over these sorts of things and buck back against things like housing problems or housing insecurity for minor leaguers. So I don't know. I mean, I am with you in that I'm not, holding my breath for that bucket 3 that I alluded to really be satiated. But what is tipping pitches if not a place to try to move the baseball labor Overton window further left,
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm sure we've talked, I don't remember exactly what we talked about in years past, but I'm sure we've talked about like abolishing MLB and having the players come together under a workers collective. And
oh yeah, of course.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And also like we were talking about minor league unionization at all as something that was very unlikely a year ago. So why not just shoot our shot? Basically, that's my take.
Shifting our focus to the majors again, I'm curious kind of what you make about the increasing gulf in team payrolls. We already kind of talked a little bit about the top end of the market and the teams that are willing to spend $200, $300, even $400 million. But we still have that class of teams that's kind of dragging down the bottom. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because that was a really big talking point around the CBA negotiations, right? Is we want more parity in this league, or we at least want teams to act like there's a little more parity in this league. And the CBA didn't really address that payroll disparity. And we're kind of where we have been for the last few years. So I guess I'm kind of curious how you think this off-season of spending changes any of that at all. And really if there's anything that can kind of be done to close that gap beyond a salary floor, which will necessitate a salary cap, which the players aren't going to agree to.
Yeah. So I like literally right before we started recording, I was on the TSN racing podcast to talk about F1, and F1 is going through like they've instituted a spending cap, which amounts to a salary cap, and for the same reasons they say it's to increase parity and reduce the competitive gulf between rich teams and poor teams. Really, it's just about reducing costs and increasing profits. And, competitive parity will or will not happen, and who really cares? But what I mentioned in that conversation was that like what it's supposed to do is to peg back like the big teams, Dodgers, Yankees, Mets, usually the Red Sox, the Phillies, usually the Cubs, like, the richest teams, it's bad for the sport if they can just spend so much and they do spend so much that they can just run rings around everybody else. So it makes sense for the health of the sport to try to make it attainable, at least make it so that upsets can happen. And if in order to do that, you want to take something like the luxury tax and, take that overage and distribute some of the rich teams' money to the poor teams so that maybe we don't have, so the Pirates can go toe to toe financially with the Mets, but they can get close enough that they can compete if they're smart. Like, Bill James articulated this way. And I think that's a good way to look at like revenue sharing. And what happens instead is that money doesn't get, even though it's like de jure black letter law that they're supposed to reinvest it in the team, what it gets allocated to is just owners pocketing it or debt service or, a number of other off-field things that don't actually make, I'm going to dump on the Pirates until they stop being so easy to dump on, make the Pirates more competitive on a year-to-year basis. And, we're seeing this this is like the reason that I care about any of this stuff in sports is because you can see parallels in real life. And like, look at the Southwest Airlines scheduling fiasco. Like during the pandemic, like, so
Here's the consumer bent.
Yes.
Here we go. Here we
It's
go.
the stock buybacks time of the pod. Let's fucking go.
Yeah, this is exactly where I'm going. So under capitalism, the thing is, if you're not profitable, if you can't compete, if you're not a good enough business to stay afloat, then you shouldn't exist, which, is a fine theoretical premise. But in the real world, what we find is that sometimes it makes sense for the government or whatever the overarching entity or society to float businesses in times of financial need, because it's better from a societal perspective. It'll be so inconvenient for that business to go under completely that you need to float them. And so, it makes sense to bail out the airlines during the pandemic when nobody's flying. And so we sent billions of taxpayer dollars to Southwest, said, we'll keep everybody, keep your inventory stable, keep everybody on the payroll. So we don't have this massive, void that needs to be filled that'll cost more than this to fill once society gets back up and running again. And instead of actually taking care of their workers and their infrastructure, the executives pocketed that money and gave themselves bonuses and did a bunch of stock buybacks. And now that society's back up and running, labor is getting crunched and the infrastructure is collapsing, not just in the airlines, but in the railroads and in healthcare and name an industry. And this is what's happening in micro in baseball, is that Major League Baseball, through revenue sharing, is the de facto government. They're saying, okay, if the Pirates aren't rich enough to compete with the Mets, that doesn't mean they should go out of business or they should become irrelevant or they should become like the Washington Generals, just like an automatic schedule win for the rich teams. It's good. It's good for the sport, and it'll be good for the rich teams in the long term if they have credible competition to play against. So let's take a little bit of the rich teams' money and let's give it to the poor teams so they can compete. And instead of using that money to compete, certain poor teams are pocketing it. And this is an area where the union has a huge bug up its ass about, and they should. And a lot of the rich teams, like the executives of the Yankees, Dodgers, Mets, the revenue sharing payers are they're like, this is not, we're not paying this money so that Bob Nutting can go remodel his bathrooms. We're paying this money so that the sport can be better, so we can get this money back in the long term because more people tune in to watch the games or buy tickets. And so this is like an odd coalition of ownership, of like a section of ownership and labor that really wants this rectified. And I'm not really sure why the league hasn't done this, hasn't really put the screws to the teams that are not allocating, their revenue sharing money to actually improving the on-field product, because it's good for the sport. And, this is a scenario in which I don't have a lot of sympathy for teams that run $50 million payrolls. There is a financial disparity that puts them at a disadvantage. And that's not why their payroll's at $50 million. And that's not why they're losing 105 games a year and drawing 8,000 fans a game. And, that's not why you can't, every time you talk to a Pirates fan who's not a complete asshole about the Steelers and Penguins, they sound like they're ready to jump off a bridge. And there are plenty of bridges to choose from in Pittsburgh. It's not a,
that's
it's
the
not
whole
a
thing.
sustainable
It's all for
situation.
3 rivers, so many bridges. And
so the system is not working. The system is being taken advantage of by bad actors. And this is something that ownership, the MLBPA can continue to file grievances about this, but ownership needs to keep its own house in order.
I have a theory about this.
Okay.
My theory is that you're right about the Mets, you're right about the Yankees, you're right about the Dodgers, the top spending teams who, get upset that the top payers who are paying the most amount of money because they are making the most amount of revenue get upset about the A's, the Orioles, the Rays, less so the Rays because they actually do try to compete in some ways, annoying as hell as they are. The
Rays
the
are
Pirates,
almost a unique situation.
Yeah, exactly. We should leave them out of this conversation. The Reds recently in the last couple of years, just being a team that sells all their players and cashes revenue sharing checks. Now, I think that is true, but I think that the middle 15 teams are happy that those teams are not spending any more money because that means that they don't have to outspend those teams by a lot. I think the Seattle Mariners are fucking pumped that the A's are spending $54 million in payroll, because then they get to say we're spending 3 times as much as the A's, which is still not enough money if you're the Seattle Mariners trying to capitalize on this window of young talent and stars that you could be bringing in to actually try to win a World Series, as opposed to just being happy that you made the playoffs for the first time in 20 years last year. Like, I think that the Cubs are happy about those things. I think that the White Sox are happy about those things. The Giants
I don't think
are
Jerry
happy.
Reinsdorf is happy about anything.
Well,
I don't think
that's
I don't think he's
true.
been happy since 1984.
For the last few years, the Rangers have been happy about this. The Astros, who are a big market team that wins a lot, but they don't actually have to spend that much because they happen to be really smart about a few things and ahead of the curve on a few things. I think all those teams are making up enough of the ownership pool that they're not ever really going to fix this on their own. Those 3 guys at the top of the league who own these teams, the Steve Cohens of the world, the Steinbrenners of the world, who've been whining about this for decades, they don't have enough pull. Like they are not Jerry Jones. They are not these NFL owners who can bend the league to their will just from their cult of personality, because that's the way the league has always run. Like there is enough like collective action from these owners, as funny as it is to say it like that I don't think any 1, 2, 3, 4 owners
like that
can really change the status quo when it comes to this, because it is about the whole cabal, not just a couple of the owners. And I think that is why Steve Cohen is an interesting figure, because I think the other 29 owners kind of hate him.
Yeah, and it's hard to it's not weird to talk about collective action because nobody understands class solidarity like billionaires.
Yeah.
And I think there is like a philosophical objection on the owner's part to prevent anybody from making more profit. And when it comes down to it, like, this is something that I think you're exactly right, that the owners, that there's a middle class of owners where, like, I don't have to outrun the bear. I just have to outrun Bob Castellini. And
and he's got a sack of vegetables over his shoulder weighing him back.
Is he the current Castellini? I forget which,
Bob Castellini is the owner, the principal owner, but I don't think he's the control person anymore.
No, he's not the son. I forget his first name.
Phil is the son.
The son is Phil.
Phil Castellini. Yeah, whichever, like, bean guy is shooting off his mouth on talk radio.
He's got carrots and lettuce and mushrooms, porcini, the vegetable king, Bob Castellini.
That's Phil.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's convenient. I agree that, and you make a good point, that, like, it's convenient for the middle class teams that want to spend $130 million on payroll and win 86 games. That Bean Guy is out here being such a big disgrace that they don't get attention when they're not spending up to snuff. And, a lot of these guys, like, one thing, I joked before we were coming on, like, regarding Steve Cohen, you don't have to hand it to him, but it is funny to, like, watch him play by the letter of the law and have 29 other owners just like, that's not how it's supposed to go. This guy's ruining our good thing. Like, I'll admit it's taking no small measure of satisfaction from that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I feel like that only, like, gets you so far, right? That idea of, like, the middle class of teams, especially when baseball's not even incentivizing baseball, the corporation, so to speak, is not really incentivizing winning at this point, right? They've expanded playoffs and that sort of thing. And so at this point, if you're in that middle class, yeah, you only have to outrun Phil Castellini, and you don't even have to improve that much, right? You can take a step back and still be in a decent enough space, right? I don't know, like when do we get to a point where it's just not a sustainable ecosystem anymore for, like, that middle 15
never
group to, like, just kind of float along.
Yeah, well, when it's not a middle 15, if it's, if it's not a middle 15, if it's like a middle 7. I think, you mentioned the expanded playoffs, and I didn't think about this, but I wonder if that's a structural change that changes the incentive, the incentives that, like, we just watched, the Phillies print money. Like, what that playoff run that they wouldn't have gotten last year has done for the trajectory of that franchise. John Middleton, who, I think is generally what you want an owner to be, is, someone who writes the checks and gets out of the way.
Yeah. And has given millions and millions of people lung cancer. Right. Yeah.
Yep. I mean, I hate to say this. There are worse ways that you can accumulate billions of dollars. And we've seen, a lot of those guys own baseball teams. I'll tell you what, lung cancer is not as bad as the 2015-16 Phillies. I'll say that right now.
Put it on the poster.
I've lost my train of thought now. But like those guys, like they'll just pay their, couple $1 million in tax penalties and they're making more money and it's just annoying. They hate any kind of tax, but they live with it. But now there's value to finishing first in the league as opposed to third. There's value to finishing seventh. Like 86 wins means something now as opposed to 80. And like that's why you spend $10 million a year on, or not 10, it was like 8.5 on, 9.5 on Drew Smiley. Why you go out and sign David Robertson, like why he's getting the kind of money that like he can make the difference between making the playoffs and not for more teams than he could have a couple years ago. So as much as it's funny every time they change the playoff system, I hate it, but it makes baseball more entertaining. Like it. So maybe I'm just not the person to talk to when it comes to playoffs, but I do like that might be the structural change that has spurred a lot of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think my main issue is that I look at the bottom of the league as being more of an anchor than the top of the league as being a rocket booster or whatever however that works in this metaphor. Like the Mets are not dragging up the rest of the teams in the same way that the A's being at 54 allows the bottom 10 teams to be close to that. And the A's are taking a lot of heat. The A's are taking a lot of heat, but the Orioles, who are supposedly in fucking warp speed mode, are only $10 million above them. So let's get fucking serious here. Like that's not a small market. That's a team that's been around for 100 years.
Well, it's
has
a small market, but like it's not.
Yeah, but a legit fan base that sells out Camden Yards, one of the most beautiful parks in all of baseball history. Like they talk about that all the time. Like where's all that money going? That you
to the Angelos family's lawsuits.
Yeah,
I mean literally. So like,
so how many teams? Like, let's be real. Let's count. Like, how many teams is it that are like actually dragging the bottom? It's the A's, the Pirates, the Reds, the Orioles, even though they were good last year. I mean, if you want to count the Rays and as a special case, I don't know what the I don't think it's like a bottom 10. I think it's like a bottom 5 or 6. And everybody else has at least like made a head fake toward trying. And even the Rockies, who suck every year, they don't suck every year because they're not trying. They suck every year because they're run by weirdos.
Yeah, like that's exactly right. But
and honestly, like if there's one thing that I dislike about the sabermetrics revolution is that like teams that suck because they're run by weirdos have become so rare. It's refreshing to still have one.
But what's your definition of not trying though? Like what is what the Brewers are doing trying? They're under they're under $120 million. Like what? It's so hard for me to really trust what is the number where a mid-market team is trying because we don't have the truth about any of their books. Like we don't have the truth about any of this stuff. And so there's no such thing as a small market team. Like the Padres are exposing all of these people.
And you think that I'm more accelerationist than you, and you're talking like that. Every team needs to be running $150 million payroll. Yeah, like
it's 2022.
Trotsky. It's like I think that's
2022. There's no reason that payroll should not be rising commensurate with rising revenues for each of these teams.
Well, the time to make that argument was before the last CBA pegged the luxury tax to the low 230s.
Newsflash, we were making that argument. We tried.
Yeah, and you lost. We lost. That ship has sailed.
God damn it.
Talk about like literally not trying to put a competitive team on the field. Like if I'm just looking at this from the perspective of a fan, I care less about how much they're spending. Like I would rather be a fan of the Rays than the Rockies right now, even though the Rockies are spending more money. Like if you're finding a way to whatever ownership does, if you're finding a way to be competitive, to be relevant, to play meaningful baseball in the second half of the season, like maybe not every year, but if you're in a rebuild, then that rebuild needs to be going somewhere as opposed to, what the Pirates are doing, for instance. And sorry, Pirates.
But that's the state of fandom in baseball. That's not the state of labor in baseball. Like that.
I guess
what
that's
the Rays
true.
are doing is maybe good for their fans. It's better than if they were.
I mean,
it's
what
better
the
than
Rays
if they
are doing
were.
is not good for their
No,
fans.
it's not.
But
It's better than what the Pirates are doing for their fans, but it's not good for labor. It's not good for the health of the game, I don't think.
no, but I can live with if it's on. I don't know if your argument is the anchor teams or anybody who's not up against the luxury tax, then
That's not what my
fine.
argument is. These teams are less than half of the luxury tax. These teams are spending less than half of the luxury tax. That's
But
not.
the Brewers
You're
have
dragging
been
it
big
down if you're
players for
spending less.
The Brewers have been big players for free agents in the past 5 years. They came within 2 games of making the playoffs last year. They're making win now moves.
Which free agents were the Brewers big players for?
They signed. I mean, this was during the capital strike, but they signed Lorenzo Cain, they signed Yasmani Grandal. They were acting like not a big market team, but a fairly big market team when nobody else was. I don't when I look at teams that are the problem, the Brewers are not the problem. The Brewers are actually fielding a competitive team.
Yes.
They're signing Christian Yelich they're keeping Christian Yelich around. They probably regret doing that at this point. They're not trading Corbin Burns the instant he hits hits arbitration.
Although if they would like to do that, I will take him in Queens. That's fine.
Yeah, I'm sure you would. You can't have your cake and eat it too, because if the Brewers
I can
Brewers
I?
are trying, then you can't just expropriate Corbin Burns. You can't just eminent domain him.
Alex, are the Brewers a problem? Yes or no?
I'm an A's fan. I have no ground to stand on calling any team a problem.
You're not your team, Alex. God damn it.
Well, 26.
You don't have to abdicate your own moral judgment just to support whatever your team is doing.
Oh, God, I know. Yeah, but 26 years of being a baseball fan has told me otherwise. So then is the answer just get better owner, get more Steve Cohens in here and continue cycling out that
no, the
bottom
answer is we
tier?
have to live with this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can live with a big middle class, and if Jesus, if 15, this is so bleak, but if 15% of the league is just non-participants, it's better than it was a couple years ago. And and it's lower than the percentage of that are actually in some form or other, the Braves aren't going out and running a $300 million payroll, but they're allocating big financial resources and they're winning 100 games a year. And so I have a hard time critiquing that on anything other than pitchforky, torchy grounds, I think this is sustainable until this group of owners decides to back out of it. And that could happen at any moment.
Yeah.
And I acknowledge that.
Yeah. I completely agree. And I think that is a good segue into our final list topic here, which is sort of the dichotomy between the two NL East teams, the top two finishing NL East teams last year, the Mets and the Braves, where you have Steve Cohen who's coming in, he's spending a lot in free agency, he's committing $100 million more to the payroll than the next closest team. We have the sort of fear-mongery old media types who are saying that you shouldn't be able to buy your way to a championship, and what the Braves are doing is quote unquote the right way. But from a state of labor in baseball perspective, I think that what Atlanta is doing is kind of alarming. Every individual move seems fair, right? There's a reason that every single player agreed to the contract to buy out their arbitration years and to get a discounted rate for their first couple of years of free agency if everything goes right. That level of security is good to have. But when I look at what Atlanta is doing, they're providing a blueprint for a lot of these teams in the middle that we're talking about to try to leverage the suppressed wages of pre-arb and arbitration players into getting the first few years of free agency for cheaper than if they actually made it to free agency at a younger age. And so I wonder what you think about that in terms of a blueprint for teams to follow, or whether or not Atlanta is more of an aberration league-wide.
I just want to say I'd take the A's following that blueprint.
Yeah. I mean, that's the name
every day.
Right? Yeah, that's what every mid-market team tries to do. They're just not as good at developing talent as the Braves. And I'd say, here's the other thing, the Braves are using structural factors in their favor to prevent labor from producing or from receiving the fullest value of its production.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's unusual. I don't think it's alarming. I think like it would have to be surprising in order to be alarming. That's just sort of how it works. And obviously it shouldn't work that way, but that's a longer conversation. That's not a, state of labor in baseball conversation. That's a podcast that we probably shouldn't record or air. But a lot of these individual deals, like, the Riley deal, the Olsen deal, it doesn't have risk, but like, if I were Austin Riley and I got offered 10 years and $212 million at that point in my career, I'd bite your hand off for that.
Yeah.
And, you can,
those two are, I think those two are maybe a little bit different because of how exceptional they were as players, but like the rest of the roster being like majority arbitration bought out players, trading for guys who other teams are not going to extend. Like they have their fingers on the scale of every single leverage, of every single imbalance in the baseball system in a way that is like, if it wasn't so fucked up, I would almost be impressed, Yeah,
I don't really have a strong moral stand on this, as like a collective team building approach. I think they're, using the structural levers that are in their favor to, to reduce value, the value that's given to their individual players. Like, obviously that's not morally righteous, but nothing that any owner has done in the past, I don't know, the entire history of baseball is morally righteous. And so what I'll say is that I could see the argument from like almost all these guys, except for the ones that I would take exception to, the contracts, the Murphy contract that just got signed, like the, and the Acuna and Albies ones. And I think like where some of this gets a little icky is not from ownership's perspective, because they're just laying out, this is every extension conversation that gets had with every player on every team, regardless of revenue. But where I saw this brought up with the Murphy contract, and it's definitely true with the Albies contract, is that like there's a conflict when they might be targeting players with who have agents without a lot of clients, where one payday, where like the one Ozzy Albies payday can really change the agency, even though it's not the best. I mean, that was just an absolute travesty. But even like the Murphy deal, it's still a lot of money for a catcher who's about to hit 30. And, that Michael Harris and Spencer Strider, they could end up being severely underpaid, but those are players with a huge amount of risk in their profile. So I can understand why they take that. Like every deal makes sense individually, and it just adds up to, I don't know if the Braves are, offering, just enough. You see, one thing that we see with a lot of these extension negotiations with like the anchor teams that we were talking about is it's just, we tried and, we offered.
Yes.
This is not.
It's a formality.
Yeah. Like, we offered Brian Reynolds $30 million over 8 years and he didn't take it, that greedy bastard. But, we're doing everything we can. Like the Braves are actually offering significant money very early in the careers of some very high risk players. And I think that they're going to come out ahead on most of these deals, if not all of them. But like, if you're Michael Harris, first year of your career, 21 years old, and you're like, we're guaranteeing you $72 million. Like, it's hard to say no to that far in the future. And, I would have a hard time going to Michael Harris and saying, turn down that contract, knowing what I know about him as a player. Like he could end up leaving $400 million on the table because of that or something. But like, this has changed your life money right now at the very beginning of your career, when you're still hugely underpaid, where there's still a risk of you suffering a catastrophic injury and walking away with nothing. And Strider too, even more so because he's a pitcher and because he's, had some injury concerns. I don't think that that's exploitive, particularly, or I don't think it's exploitive enough to be alarmed by it within the context of baseball. It's just sort of how the game works. And it's why, the real problem is this is an outgrowth of not just arbitration, but the draft. The arbitration free agency needs to get moved up. That's what allows stuff like this to happen. I don't necessarily blame the Braves for operating within this system, because the reason that, one of the reasons that this is going, their entire team is locked up through 20 whatever, is that they've built a really good team that's worth locking up. I think that's worth celebrating. They're also going to run about a $200 million payroll this year. 236, or I think our roster resource has their luxury tax estimate at $239 million. So, out of the things to get up in arms about, I don't think it's the right way. And certainly I don't think this is what the Braves ought to be spending based on what we know about Liberty Media's finances. But it's not, if this is the blueprint, if this is the thing that we're complaining about, I think the game's in an okay place, even from a labor perspective. It could be a lot worse.
I have to imagine it's pretty attractive to players as well, knowing, hey, here's a front office who is interested in actually building a long-term good contender, right? And is interested in giving the players who are part of that team money to do it and stick around. Like if I'm Sean Murphy and I just get traded to the Braves, this is where I want to be for the next 7 years or whatever.
And that guy's played for, he played for his right state teams. I don't know. We're going to go back to Sean Murphy's college career. Like he's played for good teams before, but like he's lived that mid-major life his entire life. Yeah. And the thing about labor is, particularly once you get into $73 million guaranteed territory, is that there are other like quality of life factors apart from money. Like maybe it is worth to Sean Murphy leaving $40 million on the table to know that he's going to play for a team that's going to be a contender for the next 5 years, as opposed to, just slogging it out with that miserable ass team, that miserable stadium, and then taking his chances on the free agent market. Like maybe that peace of mind, maybe that that increase in, and we see players do this explicitly all the time, take less money because they want to live in a certain place, or they want to play with certain people, or they want to be in a certain situation. Mm-hmm. And I think that sometimes as like quote unquote pro labor analysts, like we do miss that part of the puzzle by boiling it down to just dollars. And like in a general perspective, yes, that is what matters. But on a case by case basis, individual players are going to want different things. And, I think Sean Murphy signed a bad contract? Yeah. But I could see the argument from his perspective. Like he's going to be on a winning team for the rest of his prime, for the entire rest of the time he's going to be relevant as a baseball player. The Braves are probably going to be good. And, how much is that worth to a competitive athlete in dollars and cents? Like,
I hear the Cobb County schools are very good. It's very nice this time of year.
No, my wife's from Cobb County. She went to private school because the Cobb County schools are dog shit.
Consumer rant. We got it. I
just assumed wealthy suburb, but all right.
No, that's not always the case. Like they don't invest in
Alex. Southern California
down there.
Southern California. I guess no. That's why I said if you look at every individual case, yeah, it's not as exploitative as some other things that are going on in the sport, of course. But when I look at what the Braves are doing, I look at them in a calculated but above board and fair way by the standards of Major League Baseball, looking around and saying, we're going to leverage every single possible thing that we can do. And I look at other teams and they don't leverage it quite as much. You know who's not squeezing players quite as much as the Braves? The Padres, the Yankees, the Mets. Like there are other teams who are not doing that. And that's fine. That's their prerogative. They're following the letter of the law as far as we know. They're not blackmailing any of these players into taking these contracts as far as we know, as much as we like to make jokes about that on Mets Twitter. But if there were 8 teams that were as smart as the Braves in doing it this way, I think it would be an issue big enough that the PA should be like, wait, we need to make structural changes to the system, because then you start to say there's a large enough sample that we are suppressing the entire salaries of the league by letting this percentage of players sign into agreements like this that are making it harder for other players to negotiate against those numbers that they're putting into the salary pools.
And I think that is something that the Players Association should make its rank and file members cognizant of. And, you occasionally hear about somebody like Scherzer or JT Realmuto being like, I want to hit free agency, or Mookie Betts,
or Soto.
Soto, I want to hit free agency and I want to reset the market. I owe it to the other players to
Aaron Judge,
to try to reset the salary structure. But what I think it's important to, when we talk about exploitation and structural levers, like these are all like the players that they're extending, particularly maybe not Harrison Strider, but like guys like Murphy and Olsen, I almost called Austin Riley Adam Duvall. But like these are adults.
I wish he was as bad as Adam Duvall. I wish he had that much swing and miss still.
These are adults well into their career, and everybody knows this is what the Braves are about. Everybody knows what's happening. And I think even with the structural factors working against these players, they're all going into this with, they're all signing these contracts with their eyes open.
And they clearly fucking love playing there. Like, for whatever reason, they like being an Atlanta Brave. I can't understand it, but they like it, If they're happy,
then more power to them. And, if this was actually, I think maybe this is doing something to the, the overall salary structure of the game, but these guys are getting paid, they're winning, and they're, like I said, they know what they're signing up for. And that's why, I have a hard time dealing with it, feeling about this on the same level as service time manipulation or the draft or sign this extension or we won't call you up the way the White Sox have been doing. That's far more alarming to me.
Yeah. I think this is a symptom of all of those things that you just laid out. Like, and that's why I flag it. And that's why I want to talk about it instead of labor and baseball. Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. Like, this is the culmination of like several different factors coalescing together into a whirlpool. But, these are decisions made by individual actors. And I think, it's something the PA ought to take up and, remind agents of and remind players of that. Like, if you sign a pre-arb deal, just be aware these are the knock-on effects it can have. And I think that, and by the way, like, I think that what says to me that you and I don't understand the thought process behind this from a player perspective is I was thinking about this with the Albies extension is guys who are established big leaguers, even if they're pre-arb, they don't appreciate how much money they have coming to them, even if they don't produce, even if they get hurt. Just like rolling over the minimum salary, rolling over, a couple decent arbitration seasons. Like, the absolute worst case scenario, if you get into the big leagues and establish yourself, is not you walk away penniless. It's you walk away with a couple $1 million. And I think that the individual players are really risk averse when it comes to signing these deals. But, it's easy for me to say because I'm not the person who's being offered here's $73 million guaranteed. Your children are going to have live-in servants for their entire lives.
Well, your podcast appearance fee for tipping pitches this year was only $3 million.
Oh, do I get an honorarium now? Like, you guys are really taking off.
The Patreon, baby.
Talk about you guys like exploiting labor. I'm not making jack shit out of this. And here I am, risking my
80 minutes later.
Like it could be the weekend for me now. And here I am shooting the shit with you guys for, I'm not being compensated at all.
Hey man, you got to pay your dues. This is what you have to do to make it as a podcaster.
This is me getting my dues paid from all of the hours of Ringer MLB show edits that I had to do.
You paid your dues on my show, and now you're out for revenge.
Alex, is there anything else on our checklist that we need to check off before we finally set Mike free into his weekend?
I really don't think so. We wrote down Tony Clark extension, but that's probably the least interesting extension that I think we could have talked about.
He's very tall already. He does not need to be extended. I'm going to make that joke every time. So my consumer rant this year, if you have a Ring doorbell, your neighbors should have the legal right to tear it off your house and set it on fire.
So this is the next in a long lineage of very fervent, impassioned rants that Michael has given on the states of labor in baseball. The first one was about streaming and how streaming is a scam and we should go back to cable.
Cord cutting is a scam. Yeah.
Cord cutting is a scam. We should go back to cable. Do you remember what last year's was?
Electric cars are a scam.
Yeah. Oh, electric cars. Yeah, because they're just going to pump out software updates that they charge you for, and their planned obsolescence is coming to cars.
Not only that, but it's not actually that green to dig the raw materials for a car out of the living earth, ship it to Detroit, put it together, put a lithium battery in it that you're going to have to change every few years, and then offload and then still do damage to to infrastructure. And so you're still spending all this money that could be spent on buses, could be spent on trains, on fixing potholes created by your 9,000 pound Cadillac, like lowercase e Escalade, because it runs on, it's a plug-in hybrid now, and it still weighs more than a World War I main battle tank. And
So,
more
okay.
than that, you're offloading the costs of this quote unquote green revolution to consumers instead of actually turning it into what it
Yes.
should be, which is a societal good.
Right.
And it can become a status symbol, something that rich liberals can use, a stick that they can beat poor people with because they can't afford, I was going to say a Tesla, but that ship has sailed in the
So I think
by a
that
Ford Lightning or whatever.
cord cutting is a scam. You were slightly ahead of the curve on that. I think some people were already starting to share that opinion. I think electric vehicles are bullshit. You were pretty ahead on that one.
Mhm.
And I think that you've been proven phenomenally right.
I will continue to be vindicated until like the Mets have to go do their semester at sea because Citi Field is underwater.
I think that Ring doorbells are horrible for society is already
Am I
an
behind the
opinion
curve on
widely
that?
shared. Yeah, I think that a lot of
Okay.
people have been tuning that horn for a while. But I sympathize with your take. I agree. Ring doorbells are total bullshit. I'm glad that my parents don't have one, though they do have an Amazon Alexa, which is like just as bad. But
Yeah.
It's not. I
it's
don't
not
know.
just as bad for society,
have
but it is
different-
bad for surveillance purposes.
Well, this is like the argument you and I have been having the entire episode. Like, I almost have a different visceral reaction to being surveilled by the NSA than I do being surveilled by local police.
So
Like,
you're
being surveilled by the NSA is not going to be a big deal for most people, but
right, like, and you
putting
were
a
born
cop
into that, like that's
paying
status
to put
quo.
a cop magnet on your house. And you see what like people like. There was that thing earlier this week about like people like getting on the UPS guy for walking across the grass. How much more fucking suburban can you get? Like, just go lie down and die in your front yard because it'll make your lawn be better. And that's like, become human fertilizer. It's all you fucking people care about. Grass is a scam too. Did you know this?
Yeah, grass is definitely a scam.
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
That's been known. Alex, do you want to supplement Mike's consumer rants? Hashtag Mike's consumer rants presented by Mike's Hard Lemonade. No free ads.
It's pretty hard. It's like that first collective bargaining agreement, right? He's kind of set the bar
Extremely
pretty high.
Extremely high.
For me to clear. I feel like mine are all very, very sort of milk toast. I use Firefox.
Apparently,
I don't know.
so is my rant this year. So like coming in here doing free labor for you guys are complaining about. Like that's, or not you, Alex. You are without sin. Roberto over here.
You think I'm just gonna let you get off like hunky dory, everything is good, like not give you a hard time about anything? Come on, that's not the nature of our relationship.
No,
I do appreciate that you came into the episode with the mindset that actually things are pretty good. And by the end, we got there.
Bobby's
We got
like,
there.
no, they're not. This is
Yes,
not what we're
exactly.
Michael Baumann, it's always a pleasure. It's great to see you. I hope you have a tremendous 2023. You're not invited back onto the podcast until 2024. Just kidding.
Aw.
You can come on whenever you would like.
We're going to come on for the National League Division Series between the Mets and the Phillies.
Please don't put that energy into the world, for the love of God. I'm a fragile man who can only take so much. Where can people find your work now that you have transferred jobs?
Yeah, you can still follow me on Twitter at Michael Baumann. You can read me now at FanGraphs.com, where we're doing all sorts of exciting baseball writing. While I was on the podcast, I got a message from my new editor, Meg Rowley, the extremely sensitive and talented and hardworking Meg Rowley sent me a message to the effect of, "You can't say that about Eric Hosmer. We can't print that." So... Well, I'll have an Eric Hosmer signing reaction. Rafael Devers is the last thing I wrote about. Now, we're going to have some college baseball features, hopefully, in the weeks to come before college baseball kicks off next month. So, yeah, we're doing exciting work there.
FanGraphs.
I just want to say this is a space where you can say whatever you want about Eric Hosmer.
No, she was
no
right.
Holds, no
so
holds barred.
here's the thing about Meg telling me we can't publish that is like she's almost always right. Like,
Yeah,
it's not a secret.
if there's one
she's
thing
so
I've learned
good.
about Meg, it's that she's right 98% of the time.
Mhm.
Uncommonly right amount of time. thank you so much. FanGraphs, always worth your subscription dollars. Best
Oh, yeah,
baseball
subscribe,
website on the
too. I
internet.
gotta remind people to do that.
Come on, I'm doing your job for you.
I know.
It was great having you on. Thank you, honestly, for all this time. This was a great state of labor in baseball. I think people will be very satisfied with it.
And I'll come up with a better consumer rant for next year. I'll put that on my calendar.
You have a whole year.
I know. I got 12 months to think of something.
Nobody wants to do the don't the deeds, color outside the lines, and nobody wants to.
All right, thank you to Mike. Thank you to you, Alex. Just cause, you know, it's just like I like doing this with you, so thanks for hanging on the pod. I do have
Thanks for having me over.
I do have a consumer rant that I thought of in the time since we recorded with Mike. That was a few days ago now. Digital media is a fucking sham. It's not just cord cutting. Like, he was right about cord cutting. I'm sort of like advancing this take in the way that like a Pokemon, you know, grows into evolves into a larger Pokemon. The fact that I don't actually own a physical copy of like any of the movies that I have or any of the video games that I have. I know I'm not the first person to share this. Far from it, honestly. You know, I can think of like Bodega Boys episodes from 2017 where Jesus was like, you should own physical media.
Yeah.
It's all going to get taken away from you one day. But now I'm like, do I really own FIFA? Or have I just licensed the right to play FIFA with you? And if the EA Sports company or the PlayStation company, Sony, decided that they didn't want me to play FIFA anymore because they didn't like me, they could just take it away.
Mm-hmm.
It's bad.
I 100% agree.
Thank
I mean,
you.
I have to say, not the most cutting edge. I feel like generally speaking, right, we're having greater awareness of the fact that we don't actually own any parts of our lives anymore. But we should talk about it more.
Well, I think that we just need to apply it more places. Like I don't own anything.
I literally don't own it. Right now I don't
Like
I don't own my degree.
The books,
I don't own my apartment.
I don't own my car. The bank owns my car. I'm licensing my car from the bank right now. You know, I own like these books that I'm pointing at right now in the studio. These microphones, I own them.
Yeah, you do.
But you know what? The digital archives of Tipping Pitches, I don't own. They're just on the internet somewhere.
When are we going to re-record our masters?
We own the copyright of them, but I don't physically have the episodes that we've put years and years of our lives into. It puts me on a spiral every time I try to think about this.
So when you think about owning...
Burning them onto a CD.
Okay.
Yes. And putting them in my car after I finish paying it off, because then I will own the car too. You can't take it away from me.
I mean, why do CDs at this point? Go all the way back. Do like some vinyl, you know?
Oh, print Tipping Pitches on vinyl.
Yeah. Or like you know those little like wax like music players from like the 1800s where the
I'd rather do cassette tapes, honestly.
Cassettes
I think that feels more in line with what podcasts are.
Yeah.
You know, like this ephemeral thing, but not CDs is more for like playlists, like music. You burn a CD for your friend, whatever. Like I have vivid memories of my bad handwriting on my Linkin Park copy of Meteora that I like ripped from my friend.
Yeah.
I don't want to do vinyl though, because I don't think I would like what I would hear.
You think
as like the mixing engineer,
the clarity would be a little
the clarity
too
would be a
good.
little too much. Yeah. I maybe cut some corners here and there throughout the years that I wouldn't want to hear printed onto vinyl. Plus, like, that'd have to be so many vinyls.
That would be a lot of
two-part
vinyls.
episodes would really make me hate myself. All right, we're on to the B-sides now. Wow, another Rob Manfred joke. I guess we're gonna have to print another 7-inch.
That'd be good. We could release singles.
Yeah.
Right?
Just one take.
Right.
Just the cold open in a single edition.
Exactly. If you just want to hear the bits, we got that for you.
Or you just want to hear the voicemails. How about you? Have you thought of any consumer rants since we wrapped with Mike?
Well, the one that I've been thinking of, I guess, is along those same lines as digital media, but it's that we have passed the point of this creating ease of access to this sort of content.
Yeah.
Like the user interfaces of most, say, streaming apps, atrocious.
Yeah.
Are you trying to find something on Hulu? Better not.
Wait, what you could do is rewatch something that you've already watched on Hulu. That's
Yes.
what they are good at recommending to you. Like,
that is true.
here, because you liked Fleischman is in Trouble, maybe you want to watch Fleischman is in Trouble.
I just like, these are like really small things, but they bug me.
But
like,
they're not, though.
like-
They're not, because it dominates so much of our lives.
like when you're on, again, say a streaming platform with a green sort of logo on it, right?
Yeah.
Not necessarily naming any single one, but say you're on a show and you've scrolled to the bottom of the seasons. You're on season 4 out of 4. You don't see any of the other seasons on there. So like I went to go watch a TV show the other day. I was like, they only have season 4 on here? Why is that? It's because they've scrolled the rest of it outside of the screen.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Like I know this feels petty to me, but
it's not petty.
but we were supposed to streamline things, right? Like the streaming was supposed to be the chosen one.
Yeah.
Bring balance to media, not destroy it.
I find Netflix to be one of the opening Netflix when I don't have an intention of what I'm going to open and search for to be among the worst experiences of my days.
Mm-hmm.
When I open it up and I'm just like, here's 88 documentaries that were made in 5 hours.
Yeah.
You know, I have no idea what the quality of any of these.
Mm-mm.
Their recommendation algorithm is like, you're an 88% match for this. I don't know what that means.
Yeah, I'm like, why?
I don't know what they're basing that on. My watch history. I saw something the other day. I was a 60% match on Netflix for it. I had already watched it. I would argue I'm 100% match for it. I already watched it.
Hey man, that's not how probabilities work, right? You're a 60% match. You just happen to fall on that given day
No,
in
the
that
nerds
60%.
got streaming, dude. The nerds got streaming in movies. They won. Just
They
like they did
did.
with baseball. They're taking it away from us. This is exactly what's going on right now. I can't believe I'm doing this rant in the outro
Yep.
of this podcast.
Mhm.
This is exactly what's going on with fucking Babylon. All these people crushing
Jesus
Damien
Christ.
Chazelle's movie because it's making no money at the box office. And they're like, all the critics being like, he tanked his whole career. No, oh, no. He made a movie. It's a good movie. It doesn't matter how much money it made or lost because you are not the executive of the movie studio Paramount. So let it go.
You mean so you're saying it's not our money?
That is what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Yep. Bringing my same like douchebag shit posting lefty energy to movie studio discourse,
Jesus.
to box office discourse.
Good
That's
God,
nobody needs or wants that.
Wait,
but
yeah,
I'm-
wait. Oh, do you hear that? That's the sound of people tuning out right now.
tweeting at Manola Dargis, being like, "It's not your money, Manola Dargis. It's not." I have cinema in the brain, you know. Made a letterbox.
Yeah, man. Yeah, you're a big letterbox head now.
Yeah, I'm in and on Letterboxd.
You got, I think, one review on there so far?
2 now.
2.
Yeah.
What was the second?
Checked out Emily the Criminal just
Ooh.
before you came over here.
Wow.
Got me in the mood to do
Putting
a
in
pod.
work.
What would the movie title of your life be called? Like if they made a movie about Alex. Alex the what? Alex the A's fan? Alex the sucker?
It'd probably be an adaptation of the children's book, Alexander and the Terrible, No Good, Very Bad Day.
Just on repeat.
That's exactly.
It's like Edge of Tomorrow, except it's you waking up at 11 being like, fuck, I have to do this work.
Yeah, Groundhog Day, but just like fucking
Boring tasks.
giving my body over to capitalism. Yeah.
All right, it's time to end the pod. Thank you to everybody for listening. Thank you again to Mike for coming on and doing another State of Labor in Baseball. I already can't wait to do next year's. Thank you also to all of the people who have been reaching out and sharing their baseball butterfly effects, whether that be in the form of a DM or the form of a tweet at us or a prompt with a hat tip towards us or a voicemail, all of that stuff. We have been reading them. We have been listening to them in voicemail. Maybe we'll do something with the voicemails or the emails the next round that we do this. We'll have like a supplementary, like listener submitted part of the episode. But those episodes got really, really good feedback, and it was a fun kind of detour to take with Grant and Janice. So again, thanks to them as well. And a final thank you, of course, is in order to 5 members of our Alex Rodriguez VIP Club tier for being part of that club. Those 5 members this week are Jake, Craig, Ben, Tristan, and Mike. Oh, and one final thing, Alex. If you're listening this late in the episode, chances are you probably already know about Batting Around, which is our sort of sister pod, our friends over at Batting Around who have been on this podcast multiple times to do dumbest things of the baseball year. We've been on their show multiple times. They're doing their 100th episode this week. 100th episode is a great opportunity to go and tune into their show. We're huge fans of theirs, so congrats to them, and go check them out. Okay, that's everything. At long last. Thanks to everybody for listening, and we'll be back next week.
So when I reached my prime, I left my home in the Maritimes, headed down the turnpike for New England, sweet New England.
Hello, everybody. I'm Alex Rodriguez. Tipping pitches.
Tipping pitches.
This is the one that I love the most.
Tipping pitches.
So we'll see you next week. See ya!